Hi church, it's Bible study day and it is 3:30, so we're going to jump right in. We are in the book of Judges still. We're walking through that, learning about what it was like for the Israelites when they start to begin to have a community that's more established. In Genesis, they kind of have their escape through Exodus. You really finish that escape. And as you start to go through those first 5 books, the books of the Torah, you begin to see them kind of meandering and roaming. But by Judges, they're beginning to become more rooted in spaces. They're claiming land. And so as we find ourselves, we're seeing what it's like to struggle with sharing land or owning land. And that's really what's going to come to play today. When we last left it, we were still finishing up with Gideon, but on chapter 9, where we start today, we will see that Gideon is fully dead, and now it's the question of who's going to rule after Gideon. So I'm going to jump right into Judges 9 and 10 today, and I hope you can with me. So it begins on 9:1. One day Gideon's son Amalek went to Shechem to visit his uncles, his mother's brothers. Now Amalek, later we'll find out, was a slave's son. So this was not one of the ones set originally under Gideon. This is, hey Georgie on there and others are glad to have Tuesday Bible study. Keep going even in this format. So we have this son of Gideon's here, and being in mind that they were judges, it wasn't automatically assumed that their children would rise up. This isn't a monarchy, and yet Gideon, remember, is offered a chance at like a type of monarchy. Not by God, but by the people. And this is the challenge that we see. This is what actually is going to lead to the monarchy that Saul and David bring up, is that the people kept asking for a king. They wanted a king, but God's like, you have me. Why do you need somebody else when you have me? I am already king of all. Why do you keep wanting somebody to rule you? And yet the people were clamoring for a ruler. And so Gideon was given that choice, and Gideon was wise enough to say, no, I am a judge. I'm here to work with you, to guide you, but God is your king. Now his son was not that wise. Amalek is one of many sons of Gideon's. We'll actually see that he has quite a few sons, more than you will guess even. We'll come to that line. But Amalek himself is wise enough and cunning enough and a little bit evil and manipulative enough to say, I want to be the one in charge. So he's going to go to his mother's people. Now his mother's people, his uncles, were the leading citizens of Shechem. We see that in verse 2. He says to the rest of his mother's family, they have the ability to get together the leading citizens of Shechem. So they themselves must have had power to be able to pull people together. He tells them, ask the leading citizens of Shechem whether they want to be ruled by all, ready for this, 70 of Gideon's sons. Now that was a man who had a lot of children. 70 sons. Or by one man. He's giving them the option. Do you want a type of monarchy of sorts, or do you want this representative list of all these sons judging? And I have to give you that it would be difficult to have so many people make decisions for the Israelites. But he didn't really allow his brothers to have a choice in this matter. He's sending it to those that they would rule. So, and he says at the end, and remember that I am your own flesh and blood. So not only is he playing up that it'll be difficult to be ruled by so many people, but that he's saying, well, I, of course, know your best interests because we are family. Right? That's what he's leaning into. He's using for his advantage his connection to that group of people in Shechem. On verse 3, so Amalek's uncles gave the message to all the citizens of Shechem on his behalf, and after listening to the proposal, the people of Shechem decided in favor of Amalek, mostly because he was their relative. They really leaned into that, as he did. They gave him 70 silver coins from the temple, and what is he going to do with these silver coins? He's going to hire some reckless troublemakers who agreed to follow him. Now, when you see that in the Bible, that's a sign that this is not a good guy. Not only has he manipulated this group, but it's going to get worse as he starts to make these bad decisions. Who else do we see that gets paid in silver and makes bad decisions? You're right, Judas, right? So again, this is a symbol early on. Being paid and making the wrong choice is going to lead you astray. He went to his father's home at Ophrah, and there on one stone they killed all 70 of his half-brothers, the sons of Gideon. But the youngest Jotham escaped and hid. So all of his brothers, all the others, will be killed except the youngest. And that's going to be important in a second. Then all the leading citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo called a meeting under the oak beside the pillar at Shechem and made Abimelech their king. Yes, in the Bible it says king. Now many people think Saul was the first king, but keep in mind that Judges is also a time of contest. We're seeing a switch here with this chapter, chapter 9. We're seeing the switch into we want a king. We want a monarchy. Now, God's not wanting to give them that yet, as I said, but the people are claiming it. And so Abimelech is elected as their king on verse 9. But on chapter 9, verse 6. On chapter 9, verse 7, though, his younger brother who hid, the youngest of them all, is going to give them a parable. It's a type of curse story that he's delivering here. So I want you to think of this similar to what Jesus does with the other parables. A parable in this way being an agricultural story that has a message. So here, listen to this. When Jotham heard about this, when he heard about his brother's deaths, he climbed to the top of the mountain and he's going to shout out, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem. Listen to me if you want God to listen to you. Once upon a time, the trees decided to choose a king." So the trees are going to choose a king. First, they say to what kind of tree do you think they might ask first? The olive tree. It's the Mediterranean. That makes sense, right? The olive tree, be our king. But the olive tree refused, saying, "Should I quit producing the olive oil that blesses both God and people just to weigh back and forth over the trees?" So the olive tree is smart. It says, no, God's given me this job. I'm not going to stop doing this job of helping people and helping God just to become something you've asked me to become. So they go to the next tree. Who's the next tree? Then they said to the fig tree, "You be our king." But the fig tree also refused, saying, "Should I quit producing my sweet fruit just to weigh back and forth over the trees?" So the fig tree again makes a similar decision. Should I stop doing the gift that I have, stop doing my job? Then they said to the grapevine, "You be our king." Remember grapevine with wine, right? So Mediterranean foods. But the grapevine also refused, saying, "Should I quit producing the wine that cheers both God and people just to weigh back and forth over the trees?" Hi, Sharon. Hi, Janice. Hi, ladies and men that are going to watch this later. We appreciate you all following in. So the question that Jotham, the youngest son, is asking is, okay, so you went to these, what would be your first choices for kings? People that were wise, people that had strength, people that gave back. Those are all those things that those trees symbolize, right? Olive trees and fig trees and grapevine, right? Those are, in the Mediterranean, those were the trees that were giving back to the community, that were giving food and sustenance and life and trade. But none of those trees wanted to be king, just like Gideon the judge and others did not, right? But what happens next? Then all the trees finally turned to the thorn bush and said, "Come, you be our king." And the thorn bush replied to the trees, "If you truly want to make me your king, come and take shelter in my shade. If not, let fire come out of me and devour the cedars of Lebanon." So they did not go with a good tree. If the good trees all said no, they then went to a tree that wouldn't be much help, a thorn bush, right? Kind of the last of the last choices they had. And the thorn bush says, "Okay, yeah, I'll be your king. Come to me," right? But if you defy me, I'm going to burn down everything, including the best trees of all, the cedars of Lebanon. I'm going to just fire it out, right? So this is the parable he's telling them. And actually, it's one of those, unlike some of Jesus's parables, this one's pretty easy to see the message, right? That they had options. They had asked people that were leaders before, and they did good leadership, but they didn't want to be king. So now they've asked this bad guy to be their king, this thorn bush of type people to be their king, and it's going to be a curse that Jotham gives them. He said, "You're going to be cursed by your choices." Jotham continued, "Now make sure you have acted honorably and in good faith by making Abimelech your king, and that you have done right by Gideon and all his descendants." Have you done the right thing, people? Have you treated him with the honor he deserves for all he accomplished? Are you honoring Gideon's memory by killing his children? Remember, Gideon was that judge who just helped him through so much of his life. Are you honoring his memory for all that he did by killing his children and lifting up only one of his children and making him officially king? "For he fought for you and he risked his lives," he's talking about Gideon here, "risked his lives when he rescued you from the Midianites, but today you have revolted against my father and his descendants, killing his 70 sons on one stone, and you have chosen his slave woman's son Abimelech to be your king just because he is your relative." If you have acted honorably and in good faith toward Gideon and his descendants today, then you may find joy in Amalek, and may he find joy in you. But if you have not acted in good faith, then may fire come out from Amalek and devour the leading citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and may fire come out from the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo and devour Amalek. So may you be cursed, and may Amalek be cursed, if both of you did not come at this with the best intent. Now, of course, he knows they didn't have the best intent on either side. So in a sense, what he's doing is he's standing up on behalf of his brothers that were lost, telling this kind of preachy parable, drop mic at the end saying, curse on your household, and walk out, right? That's what's happening. Now, what do you think happened to the people? Do you think the curse is going to play out? Well, let's see. So in verse 22 of Judges 9, after Amalek had ruled over Israel for 3 years, God sent a spirit that stirred up trouble between Amalek and the leading citizens of Shechem. And they revolted. God was punishing Amalek for murdering Gideon's 70 sons, and the citizens of Shechem for supporting him in this treachery of murdering his brothers. The citizens of Shechem set up an ambush for Amalek on the hill. So back and forth over the next part of the chapter, we're going to see people try to kill Amalek. Amalek kills other people. There's going to be this tension. So Jotham's parable is going to play out. What's interesting on verse 26, though, is an outsider comes into this story. Gaal, son of Ebed, moved to Shechem with his brothers and gained the confidence of leading citizens of Shechem. During the annual harvest festival at Shechem, held in the temple of the local god, the wine flowed freely and everybody began cursing Amalek. And I kind of picture this like you got this big gang of guys coming in, these big rough like Viking or motorcycle bikers or something. This big guy, Gaal, who comes in and he goes, "Who's this guy Amalek? How's he get to rule?" And that's literally what he's going to say. He says, "Who is Amalek? He's not a son of Shechem. So why should we be his servants? He's merely the son of Gideon," right? By this point, Gideon's gone. The memories, how quickly memories get lost, right? Great leaders, even the greatest of leaders like Gideon, this isn't even one generation, and people are saying, "Who's that Gideon? I don't remember him," right? How quickly time changes. And so already by this, just his son's time, people are already starting to say, "We don't remember. We don't know what he did. What's the point of him?" And so this foreign group of people come in and say, "We're going to take Amalek down. They're drunk. The wine's flowing. They're sprouting it out in front of the whole community. Take down Amalek. What's the point of him? I don't need to listen to his rule. Why is he in charge of me?" Now, Amalek has people around too, though. And so he's heard. So on verse 30, Zebel, the leader of the city, heard what Gaal was saying, and he was furious. He sent messengers to Amalek, telling him, "Gaal, son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to live in Shechem, and now they are inciting the city to rebel against you. Come by night with the army and hide out in the fields. In the morning, as soon as it is daylight, attack the city." So he sends word to the king that there's an kind of rioter, an inciter of a riot in town. It's time you take him down. And so Amalek, in the next couple verses, verse 34, so Amalek and all his men went by night and split into 4 groups, stationing themselves around Shechem. Gaal was standing at the city gates when Amalek and his army came out of hiding. Gaal's going to see them, and he says, "Look, there are people coming down from the hilltops." Zebul, who set this up, said, "Oh, no, those are just shadows." And then he says to him, "No, you're right. They're not shadows. Those are people that you spoke out against. Those are Amalek's people." And Amalek will end up killing. It says, Amalek returned at Mil, and Zebul drove Gaal and his brothers out of Shechem. So they are forced out of the city. Now in verse 42, the next day the people of Shechem went out into the fields to battle. So he did incite enough in the city to get them to say, "Okay, we want to take down this king now too. We want to be our own people." Don't communities often feel like they don't need leaders? I mean, I think this has been something throughout time in the book of the Bible. We see people saying, "Why is this person in charge? We can make our own decisions." And as a country, as Americans, I think this has been a question we've asked a lot of our time throughout history. You know, what is the role of a leader? What is the point of a leader? And I think we find in Judges the reality that communities need leadership for a couple things: direction, hope, guidance. Right? But could that be a judge and not be one who has full power? Is that the role of a president or a prime minister? All these kind of intricacies. That's what's happening in Judges. They're starting to figure out, what kind of leader do we need? And we've asked that question before with this Judges Bible study. That's really the question Judges keeps asking. So the people are going to come out. When Amalek saw the people coming out of the city, he and his men jumped from their hiding places and attacked them. So he's attacking his own people at this time, the king is, which I think we've seen that is the problem in America too. What happens when leaders don't have their people's back and instead they kind of come around and take out their own people, or maybe more recently, I don't want to get political, but I think we saw that a little bit with some of the responses to the peaceful demonstrations, right? What does it say about leaders who attack their own people? And I'm not pushing one side or the other. This is not Republican or Democrat conversation. What I'm saying is, what happens to a community when the leader attacks the people? And I think we've seen this with both Democrat and Republican leaders before. I think we've seen it throughout history in different countries. We've seen it especially with dictatorships, right? Where is the line? And so that's what Amalek's people are asking. Right? And as Amalek attacks his people, this becomes a question. God's trying to say to the people, do you really want this kind of leadership? Is this the king you want? Now, on the flip side, I want to push back at God a little bit. And yes, I did just say that. Push back at God a little bit. Because God says, you don't need a king, you got me. But it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to look at God as a king in a sense of like an earthly king. We had Jesus, but with Jesus, this is pre-Jesus, but we're talking pre or post Jesus, right? When Jesus is here, it's a little different, God on earth. But when God is not as present on earth in physical form, arms and hands and feet, how do we continue to look at God as a leader, a king? And so does that become a role for us as God's people? Do we become ones to help guiding and sharing that judgment and to help sharing that joy and that hope and all of what that means to be leaders? Are we the leaders? I don't know. This is something I could ask you on here if you have thoughts about this. How do we play into the role of God as king? If God didn't want us to have a king, then how do we follow God in that way? And I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. You're welcome to give some feedbacks below, but I think it's a good question that's coming up. So we continue on a little bit. So the people are fighting back. There's a battle on verse 45. The battle went on all day before Amalek finally captured the city. He killed the people, leveled the city, and scattered salt all over the ground. Scattering of salt is something that comes out of Near East. It's the idea that by scattering salt, you're kind of making it much more difficult for things to grow up in that area. It's a metaphor, but it's also a literal scattering of salt to kind of curse the land. Then on verse 46, when the leading citizens who had lived in the Tower of Shechem heard what had happened, they ran and hid in the temple of Baal-Bertha. Somebody reported to Amalek that the citizens had gathered in the temple, so he led his forces to Mount Zalom. He took an axe and chopped some branches from a tree, then put them on his shoulder. So people are hiding out in the tower. And he just starts to put like piles of birch behind him. Quick, do as I have done, he tells his men. So each of them cut down some branches following Amalek's example. They're carrying the branches, the pile of branches, they piled them against the wall of the temple and set them on fire. So all the people who had lived in the Tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, die. They die in the tower in hiding, and those are his own people. Then Amalek attacked the town of Thebez and captured it, but there was a strong tower inside the town, and all the men and women, the entire population, fled to it. They barricaded themselves in and climbed up the roof of the tower. Amalek followed them to attack the tower, but as he prepared to set fire to the entrance, a woman on the roof dropped a millstone that landed on Amalek's head and crushed his skull. Millstone, there's one actually if you're watching this in Littleton, there is one at Shillings. A millstone could be a very big stone, or it could be a piece of millstone she even dropped. But again, this is, we see this with David and Goliath, right? A small stone taking down the great giant. If it is the big millstone, that's a whole different story. But even just the metaphor of a woman taking this stone and destroying the king. Now, Judges repeatedly has these stories of women. So women, again, Judges is a great book for powerful women, because here's another one. But what's interesting here is Amalek, he gets hit in the skull, so he is dying. But he quickly said to his young armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me. Don't let it be said that a woman killed Amalek." He did not want to be taken down by a woman. That would be seen as weak. and he didn't want to be remembered that way. So the young man ran him through with his sword, and he died. When Amalek's men saw that he was dead, they disbanded and returned to their homes. So they no longer had a leader, and without their king ruling them, they didn't see the reason to attack. So the people in that tower lived because of that woman's actions. In this way, God punished Amalek for the evil he had done against his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also punished the men of Shechem for all their evil, so the curse of Jotham, son of Gideon, was fulfilled. That chapter, chapter 9 itself, is almost a little book alone. A book about the struggles of heirs who follow great leaders. How do you follow a great leader? Islam has a lot of problem with this, right? There's different groups in Islam because of the question of Muhammad not designating a specific leader. Other groups, we've seen this too. When you don't have a designated leader to follow, you begin to have some of these challenges about who's really going to take that mantle up. Now, we moved to chapter 10 for a minute, and 10's a much smaller chapter. 9 was really our big one for today. 10 is really just going to start to tell us that Tola, son of Puthas, son of Dodad, was the next person to rescue Israel. So another judge rises up, but we don't really know anything about him other than his tribe and where he was from. He's from Ephraim. He's going to judge for 23 years. Then we know on verse 3, after Tola died, Jair from Gilead is going to judge, and he's going to judge for 22 years. Then you got the Amorites pressing Israel again. On verse 6, even after those two judges, again the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. They served the images of Baal, and then a bunch of gods are listed intentionally, right? Because it says after that list, they abandoned the Lord and no longer served him at all. So they picked every other god but God. On verse 7, so the Lord burned with anger against Israel, and he turned them over to the Philistines and the Amorites, who began to oppress them that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the Israelites east of the Jordan River. So because they followed every other god, God said, fine, you don't want to listen to me, you don't want to respect me, you don't want to follow me, go ahead, trust these other gods and see what happens to you. And that's going to happen for 18 years. Then the Israelites were in great distress, on verse 10 of 10. Finally, they cried out to the Lord for help, saying, we have sinned against you because we have abandoned you as our God and have served the image of Baal. The Lord replied, did I not rescue you from the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Sidonites, the Amalekites, and the Maonites? So, in a sense, God is saying, hey, wait, so I helped you here, I helped you here, I helped you here, I helped you here, but you went with that other guy? Or that other lady? What were you doing? Did you forget everything? And we know they did, right? And we know we do. We often forget God when things are tough, don't we? We say, where is God? And then God's like, wait, wasn't I here with you then when that happened? And wasn't I here with you then? And wait, didn't I see you through that? And right now, we're saying that same thing, right? We're like, oh, yeah, this God has been with me throughout all of this. I don't know about you, but I have found I am a fast mover as a person. Some of you know I think fast and I act fast. And it feels like every day there's some kind of like possible emergency level issue. The other day, I had a hair clip in my hair, a bobby pin, and I smacked it right into my eyeball, and it hit my eyeball. Or we've had some issues with a lot with Owen not feeling well lately. Or I had a fall that I had in the house, pretty sharp one, pretty bad one. Or we've had issues where one of us has got sick almost. Like, it feels like almost every day. Like, crazy things. Open the oven and it's too hot. I think it's when you stay at home, those kind of things happen. But it's been fascinating because it's just a reminder of how many times God takes care of us, but we don't even think about it, right? Those things happen all the time in our days, but we don't spend that time thinking about it. Some of you are going through some really difficult things right now, physically or spiritually or mentally. And you're watching this, and I want you to just think, how many times during a day is God protecting you? How many times during your life has God been with you? So don't lose faith. Don't be like these Israelites who are saying, oh, we've forgotten you. It's been a while. Maybe we'll just go with some other God, right? Or we'll just let this go because you're not living up to what we think. We're having a hard time. I don't think we can even imagine how many times God has been with us. I don't think we can comprehend the magnitude of God's protection for us. And I just think I've never really noticed it as much as through the like staying at home time period now, of just how many little things can happen in a day that really make us feel like we don't know how blessed we are. And so I want you to hear that, those of you watching, how much God is with you, and to not lose faith. Learn that from this book of Judges. They keep forgetting, and they have to be reminded over and over again. Do not let us forget. And so the Lord says to them, did I not rescue you? On verse 10-11. And when they oppressed you, you cried out to me for help, and I rescued you. Yet you have abandoned me and served other gods. And so God says this to them, ready? So I will not rescue you anymore. Go and cry to the gods you've chosen. Let them rescue you in this hour of distress. God's just saying, fine, you don't want to pay attention to me? You don't want me to pay attention to you? Fine. Let's see what happens. God doesn't leave, right? God is, in a sense, testing them to say, how much do you really want to come back to me? And the good thing is, I will give the Israelites this. The Israelites didn't stop. It says on verse 15, but the Israelites pleaded with the Lord and said, we have sinned. Punish us as you see fit, only rescue us today from our enemies. Then the Israelites put aside their foreign gods and served the Lord, and he was grieved by their misery. At that time the armies of the Ammon had gathered for war and camped in Gilead, and the people of Israel assembled and camped in Mizpah. The leaders of Gilead said to each other, whoever attacks the Amorites first will become ruler over all the people of Gilead. And I leave you with there. We'll see what happens next. It's kind of a cliffhanger that they leave us with in that chapter. But what I want you to get out of that is that God pushed back and said, okay, fine, you don't want to be with me? The people said, no, God, we were wrong, not you. Notice that, right? We've sinned as people, not God. We've forgotten you. You didn't forget us. And so let us be reminded of that when we hear these stories of that often always, not often, always it's us who walk away from God, not God that walks away from us. And how quickly we can get led astray, even in our own lives. We may not be at the level of Amalek killing 70 sons, right, brothers, Gideon's sons, but we do forget on our own sometimes that God is with us. So I invite you this week, I invite you this week to think about how present God is in your life, and in those moments when you're kind of wanting to say, instead say, take a breath, be present. Find one thing in your day that is a joy for you. Find one moment that you say, wow, that is a God moment. And I promise you, when you start looking for God moments, you're going to find more of them. I just wish that those Israelites had done that earlier. Don't we always wish that? But for 2020 vision is a great thing. That's interesting, right? 2020 vision this year is a strange thing, but maybe it's a wake-up call too. All right, friends, that was our Bible study in the book of Judges, 2 chapters each week. I hope you join us next week as well. Bye.